Welcome to Breaking the Silence of Design, a bi-monthly vodcast designed to discuss the issues of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion in the built environment. My name is Karen Compton, and I'm your co-host and principal of A3K Consulting.
And I'm Gabrielle Bullock, Principal and Director of Global Diversity for Perkins & Will. Over the last year, we have explored the issues of race and equity and privilege with a series of guests and academics, architectural firm leaders, and agency leaders. But today, we'll expand that conversation to include construction. And so today, we are joined by Noah Boro, Business Development Manager for Turner Construction Company for the local Southern California market. Welcome, Noah.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Okay. So, Noah, we've had a working relationship for quite some time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm jealous.
And so I know you.
Yeah.
But to give our viewers a perspective, could you share a little bit about your background? I know that you've had multiple roles within Turner Construction.
Yeah.
And you've been with them for over 18 years. So enlighten our audience.
Sure. Well, I met you actually on my first project out of college at UCLA. So that was a pleasure. So I've worked in a series of different roles. I spent some time, I'd say about the first half as a project engineer. So MEP systems, structures, managing trades. Then transitioned to superintending role. So more out in the field, day to day. And that continued actually all the way through May of last year when I joined business development. So the last two projects I did were the Kaiser at Baldwin Hills and then SoFi Stadium as a superintendent on the roof structure.
Excellent.
Nice for you.
Yeah, and that's kind of like the work side of it. But outside of that, it's been ACE Mentor program, staying engaged in the community. When our ERGs got started, I helped with Michelle Ballard with our local ERG here in SoCal, Diversity and Inclusion, and was more recently, in the past year, joined an Inclusion Action Committee that was started in the summer of 2020, and that was really to take a hard look at us internally and see how we could make positive change and impact change in terms of equity within our company.
Privately, you have shared that as a biracial professional, people may mistake you as being not a person of color. Mm-hmm. How has that allowed you to view race and racism? And what perspective does that lend to you as you kind of look at the issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion in construction?
Well, thank you for the question. First, I want to acknowledge the ancestors and pay some respects to the family. My mother came here from the island of Dominica. She's from the West Indies. In her teens, my father was raised by Polish immigrants, Polish Jewish immigrants, who escaped Europe before he was born. And so, that's the foundation that I came from. And what's interesting, I'm at a point now where I embrace it and it's an empowering thing. But growing up, it's challenging because a lot of people want to put you in a box, right? That's kind of our pattern, I'll say, in America, is that you got to fit in somewhere. And people want you to choose a side. Yeah, which are you more Jewish? Are you more black? What is it? And so now I'm able to say that I'm 100% of both of those things. Mm-hmm. But that's something that came over time. So in the industry, and I guess as a part of that, I need to first acknowledge my privilege, right? As a person who's seen it through both lenses, right? My father, he could walk into a room and he doesn't have to tell everybody that he's Jewish. So he has a certain privilege in that. So that was my male role model growing up. That was my perspective. So seeing that and being able to kind of transition into both worlds, I've seen the disparities in how, groups of people, I'll say, that look one way versus look another are treated, or maybe who follows you around a store or what questions get asked of those individuals. So what's interesting in the industry is that, and I'll say just in general, my black and brown brothers and sisters have always seen me, as a part of them.
We see you.
Right.
We see you.
The nod. There it is. Yeah.
The nod. Yeah.
Got a couple on the way over
Yeah.
here. Just walking over.
Yeah.
See you.
I see you.
Yeah. But the flip side of that is I've had people say, "Oh, I had no idea." Right. I don't really see color, and so I think color blindness is part of our problem. And and these are well-intentioned
Right.
people, right? There's nothing malicious about it, but in my opinion, that creates almost like a passive, you know, suppression of culture, right? Because as opposed
Because
to
you're not
saying-
acknowledging the person for who they are.
Correct.
Don't see color, then you don't see me.
Yeah.
Right. And that's all fine and well until it's time for, performance reviews, or you got to
Right.
have a difficult conversation, and then you're realizing you don't know how to interact with this person because you never really got to know them and whatever it is that their culture builds for them as a person, right? So I think it starts off that way, and then it becomes a challenge later. So my belief is that celebration of culture is really in where the empowerment is, and that's what I've really appreciated, I'll say, about the last year plus. Is it's been a national celebration of culture, right? We're picking the months back up. We're talking about people. Folks are feeling empowered, to talk about their history. It's really opened up a lot of conversations that I feel like we wanted to have. A lot of conversations that maybe we would
We've
have
all
on a
tried
couch
to
together. But now those conversations are entering, the executive suite and being shared more globally.
So I understand, construction is very different from architecture and engineering, in part because of how projects are funded, perhaps publicly funded with taxpayer dollars, labor agreements, local hire programs, and initiatives that attempt to achieve equity and access in contracting. Yet, as an industry, we still struggle to achieve the real inclusion. There's no easy fix, but what do you see is missing to make the leap from compliance, one of my favorite words, to cultural inclusion? And you talked a little bit about celebrating culture, so can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think, well, one, I see it and hear it more, again, in this, kind of global awakening that we're having over the past year. But I think a lot of it starts on the owner side, right? That's where the dollars are coming from. You can really set the stage at that level. There's a lot of companies, Turner has made a commitment to, supporting minority, women-owned, small, disadvantaged businesses for decades now. That's a part of our culture. But what's I'll say empowering is when you step into a project where the client is saying, this is what I want to do, and I want you to be a part of that, right? And so I'm seeing it transition beyond just the partnerships at a sub-tier level, at a trade partner level, and I'm seeing it kind of merge more into strategic joint ventures, right? How can we help a company grow through this experience, not just at the sub-tier level, but at the general contractor level?
And to be clear, you're seeing that because the owners are asking, but also because your organization has a culture of honoring that commitment.
Absolutely.
To be clear.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, it's both. But I think so for a company like us, we're going to do it because of that culture. Not everybody's in that same space. So that's where I believe the owners can be most impactful, is saying, if you're going to be a part of this project, this is how I want you to approach it, right? So you're kind of interjecting that thought into this company's process to say, okay, the owner's asking for this. How can we challenge ourselves to meet that ask?
Have you, I don't know if you can answer this, but the flip side of that is when an owner or a client has no interest in building a culture of inclusion or representing that in their projects. Do you have those kinds of conversations as an organization, whether you should align yourself with clients that don't necessarily share your values?
We do. And I think, what's nice about our foundation is that we can always fall back to what we know and what we do. And there's not an owner who's going to say, I don't want you to do that necessarily.
Yeah.
But because that.
But we're not going to pay for
it. Right. And but because it's become a part of our culture, we're going to interject that regardless. Right. That's something that we are committed to as a company, and I think But the same way that we talk about clients in a, hey, do we want to work for this person again? Just on a general, how did that job go sense, right? This conversation is a part of it as well. Like, do we have a cultural alignment where we can really build a relationship? Because 80% of our work is from repeat clients, and so we tend to find those that we have a strong cultural alignment with, which can come just at the how we interact level, but this is also a part of it.
What I appreciate is it's not just a compliance culture.
Right.
What you have created is a culture that genuinely looks for opportunities of engagement.
Yeah.
Whether that's in small and minority business programs, through your university and education program, there are all types of points of entry that really shift the culture of Turner, which is what we spend our time talking about, is how do we create organizational culture
Yeah.
that fosters belonging and inclusion. That's what I truly appreciate.
And I will say that when you can guide somebody down that path
Yeah.
and share that experience with them, like nobody feels bad after you have, these wonderful success stories,
Right.
Like look at this company, look at these people we were able to draw in from the community, like have a conversation with somebody on site. How do we break down those barriers between the people actually performing the work with all that pride and skill and the clients themselves, right? And connect those two, because there's so much passion in the trades and in the building trades. And when you can tie a project to a community, when you can have
Yeah.
the demographic of that community represented strongly on a job site, it's very powerful, because you'll get people who have these incredible stories. And when an owner gets a hold of that, whether that was their initial intent or they're just coming into it and kind of gaining an understanding, that can help, steer their path for the next project.
Absolutely. Okay, there's a follow-up to that. So you shared that following the murder of George Floyd, Turner took a very active posture and posted racism and hate, not in our house, throughout all your job sites. What has the impact of this been, and how do we avoid fatigue when we have so much further to go?
Yeah. So I think first and foremost, our process was to look at ourselves, right? We had to first really address our complacency, right? And I can say I've been complacent, right? I've been a superintendent on a job site. I've walked by. There's a lot of amateur artists in construction. I don't know if you know this.
I love that.
There's people.
That's a really nice way of putting it. That's so
Yeah.
politically correct.
Yeah. They're up and coming in their careers. Maybe it's a side hustle. You never know where it's going to end up, right? But they like to express themselves on the inside of porta-johns and
Yeah.
on the plywood barriers next to the hoist. So we're accustomed to seeing certain things on a project, and I think you really can become desensitized to it, right? You come in and you see it all over, and it may be shocking at first, but then you start to kind of accept it as a norm. And so first we had to step back and say, you know what, this is our house, right? That's where that came from, was our job sites are our house, they're ours to manage. We can control everything that happens on that job site, just like we can control safety or control schedule. We can also control how people feel and how people are allowed to express themselves on our job site. So that's really where that started. And that messaging was strong, and it was intentional, and it allowed us to take a stance. And basically there were job sites, big major projects that were shut down, so that we could then have a stand down with the entire project team and do some training on what it meant to be inclusive and what the policies were going to be going forward. We essentially had to hit the reset button across the company to some extent. But
So which came first, kind of the reflective period of, okay, this is no longer acceptable to be complacent about this, and now we're going to really say this is not in our house? Or was it that you set out and said not in our house, and then you were really reflective about how to address the issues? So kind of for people who are looking at this and trying to figure out how do they move first, which came first?
I would say the reflection came first.
Okay.
We're a big company, so we're always, and we're also a bunch of engineers, right? We always have to analyze
Yeah.
things before we do
There's
it.
a flow chart somewhere.
There's definitely
Sure.
a chart. Oh yeah, lots of them. They're glorious. The reflection came first, and the statement came with that, and then it was just a wave across the company, to the highest level, getting down to the field level, and our superintendents who run the job sites, and saying this is where we stand as an organization, and these are the policies and procedures, right? The scenarios that we're going to go through, but we're going to hold to this, and make sure that everybody's clear. It's you look at it the same way that you do safety, right?
Yeah.
There are things in safety that have changed over times. Right now we got hard hats with straps on them, which coincidentally Europe has been doing for a while. But there's always change, right? We
They have
instituted a glove
straps now?
policy. They have straps.
Like
yeah.
under here?
Yeah, they look like mountain climber
Oh,
helmets. Yeah.
man.
We'll get one for you.
No, I don't like, the
Helmet hair.
Oh yeah, the hard hat hair
yeah,
is at a new
man.
level now because that thing is like,
Yeah.
it's tight to your head. The messaging on the job site was clear, and it was the same as any kind of safety message, which is this is unacceptable, and if this happens, this is what will happen on the job sites, right? We're going to shut down. We're going to talk about these things. So I think being able to approach it through that lens is helpful because the workforce is accustomed to making those safety shifts, but not necessarily the cultural shifts.
So
And
I
has that
wonder-
helped
Go
with
ahead.
the fatigue, fighting fatigue, making it more part of just like the safety program and,
Yeah,
all of those?
it has to become a part of how you operate, right? Just common business. So now, when you come on site, you used to do a safety orientation. Now you're also going to do an orientation that talks about, how to treat others on the job
Oh.
site and being respectful of different cultures. And that was rolled out within a few months of the racism and hate, right? We got to start working on a informational video so that you can have this as a part of our orientation for job sites. So we can set that standard from the day somebody enters a job site and then maintain it throughout.
So two things I wanted to just clarify. So you're saying that there's, in addition to doing your site safety, people come onto a job site and they're now going to learn how do you treat other people as part of your project. And if you don't, there are consequences for that.
Absolutely.
Is what I heard.
Yeah.
Talk to me just a little bit about you're willing to take the biggest consequence of all, which is to shut down a job. That's a key business decision, and that's not one that people take lightly. So I'm real curious as to what that trigger looks like, because for a number of people that are listening to this and watching this, they're going to say, we'll never do that, because the fear of losing money kind of usurps everything else. So give a little context as to why you felt it was necessary, why Turner felt it was necessary to take that step.
Well, I want to tie it back to our last conversation also, in that the clients in every case that I'm familiar with were 100% supportive of this. So it was really, to talk about the flow of information, right? It's going to be discovered at the job site level. That's going to quickly get to job site leadership, which gets to business unit leadership, which gets to, in many cases, national leadership. And that decision is made based on, the severity of the instance. But there's also in there a conversation with the client who's familiar with our policies and how we've made this redirection within the company. And we're speaking to them saying, this is what we plan to do, and they support it. So I think, that you can't fear the dollars in the same way that you wouldn't for a safety incident, right? If somebody, God forbid, were to fall or someone were to hurt themselves, right? We're all going to gather around and we're going to talk about it. And this is no different, right? And if you think about it, safety is the perfect parallel, because you have to be able to walk on a job site and have a certain comfort level in that, that barricade's going to be there where you need it. You're going to be protected from falls. The job site's going to be kept clean enough that you can work safely. This is the same thing, right? You have to be able to work on a job site feeling comfortable and not thinking, I'm going to turn this corner and see something that diminishes me as a person. So I think that psychological safety is really where we shifted the focus.
Now, Gabrielle asked a question about fatigue.
Yes.
And
Yes.
if I read correctly, at some point the postings on the job site changed from not in our house because there was a level of fatigue that was starting to build up. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, from my understanding, we are now at our house, our home. And so what we found is that there were some people who were getting, I think, feeling a bit outcast from the conversation, right? They're just not able to step into the lens with us and see it the same way. And the thought was that our house, our home made it more engaging, right? Allowed some of those people who were less comfortable to step inside, have the same conversations, right? The same policies, but for those individuals to feel a bit more comfortable. And I think there's different schools of thought on that.
So it's a difference between being explicit
Yeah.
And being implicit.
and then being implicit.
Yeah.
And
It's kind of covert, overt in a way.
And so I think for Turner, that's a perfectly fine
Yeah.
shift, as long as, you know, they started with the explicit and in your face, this is, you
This
can't
is-
deny what
yeah.
this means. And then now, after you've established it as policy, make it more comfortable for others.
But the whole purpose of making it more comfortable for others, to Noah's point, is
Yeah.
to continue to keep people engaged
Right.
and
Correct.
to bring
Right.
them in so
Right.
that they
Correct.
don't feel like they're sitting on the outside of it.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
it's
we-
almost like we don't care what you call it, as long as the activity still happens, the
The
conversation.
discussion, the
still is.
narrative.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you think of it like a boardroom meeting, right? You got somebody sitting over there with their arms crossed, and you could tell, right, like you're losing them. And so I think it was an attempt to kind of reach out to those individuals and say, hey, you're a part of this too, right? And we got to do this together.
There's an appreciation for being able to, for lack of a better word, read the room
Yeah,
and realize, okay, we now need to switch gears or
Yeah.
switch tactics in
Yeah.
order to continue to increase engagement.
right.
That ability to read the room, that sense of awareness, corporate awareness, cultural awareness, I think is what organizations really need to work on so that we continue to shift gears and move the narration forward as opposed to just going, okay, we're done.
Right, right. The fatigue part is the most challenging part. You know, for us as an industry, for America,
Yeah.
For individuals.
For
for individuals, 100%. That's the challenging part. And I really think, you know, at the end of the day, it just comes down to conversations like this. You can't stop and reflect and think, oh, we're past that point, right? I mean,
That was last year's
Yeah.
work,
right,
right?
Yeah.
right. It's
Oh,
fascinating.
we don't have to do that
I think of how
anymore.
many people were shocked last year, right? How many of our colleagues, right, when these conversations really started to hit certain avenues, certain levels of conversation, right? You had people reaching out, you know, I had no idea, I'm so sorry. And the people who weren't shocked were black and brown people, because this is the world we live in, and it's always been that way. So there's some privilege tied to that, but at the same time, the only way to move the conversation forward is with the voices of the people who are already fatigued by, you know, their interactions throughout their careers, throughout their lives. So it takes a village, it takes everybody.
Yeah.
And I think the only way to move the needle, to avoid that fatigue, is to continue to talk about it. We have to be open in the conversation. We can't go inward, right? I think America kind of has a history of going inward and kind of tucking away some of the ugliness of our past. But it's really key to continue to talk about it, because it's important that the next generation understands it, or the person who hasn't experienced that, you know, in their personal life, to understand the perspective of someone like the two of you or myself. So that connection is key, and continuing the conversation is critical.
So you continue to lead a diverse team of professionals, managers, and fields people. But you came today to have a conversation with us, and I'm certainly sure you had a question for us as well. So I'm going to ask you, what was your question?
Okay, look, I gotta lean up in my chair, right?
Okay, I'm afraid.
gonna lean
I'm
in on this?
Okay, you're gonna lean in.
Your posture was perfect.
Then we're afraid. I think we're a little afraid.
So I would love to get both of your perspectives, right, and some insight into your struggle. And I'm thinking of, you know, the little black girl somewhere, little brown girl who's looking at this industry or looking at just the professional world and thinking, you know, how do I get there? And I'm sure somewhere along the way you hit a bump in the road. So I would love to hear how you responded, and you share your story. And since I know I have to pick somebody, I'm going to do this super diplomatic and go alphabetically.
Oh, okay, good.
with G.
Yes, first time it
Starting
paid off
with G.
to
Okay.
have a.
I think last names would have been the same thing.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
You got it either way.
You know, Noah, I've been thinking about this question, and for me, the bump in the road, and it's been a consistent bump, and it comes from being the only one in the room, and how that makes you react, behave, modify your communication style, right? So I got used to being the only one in the room pretty early. Was I comfortable with it? No. But I had this internal strength and perseverance.
Yeah.
When you grow up black, it's almost ingrained. It's how we are wired. It's how we've had to live. So it became second nature, but but it's a heavy toll,
Right.
right? So you always want to work 110%, take away any excuse to be marginalized, or see, I told you they're not, as good as we are, whoever they and we are. So that's been consistent. I would say explicitly, I've been challenged on whether I'm an architect or not.
Oh, wow.
What do? I'm an architect. No, you're not. It's like, say what? I got the student loans to prove it. So things like that, having to convince people
Yeah.
and remind them that yes, I am an architect and I'm as good as you are.
So I'm kind of similar to Gabrielle. Now, I'm not an architect. I'm a strategist. My first degree actually is in chemistry.
Jesus.
Okay.
She's brilliant.
I don't know about all that.
That's where my love of science just plummeted. Was chemistry.
But I'm analytical. I'm analytical. And when I tell people that, much like Gabrielle's reaction, oh, you can't be that. Oh, really? I have the blood, the sweat, and the tears to prove it. And I think the sting is that constantly having to try and prove.
Yeah.
I think my 50-plus-year-old self would tell my 20-something-year-old self something very different right now, which is, this is going to happen to you, and you just have to have sheer grit and determination that no matter what you see or hear, you're going to get up and go again.
Yeah.
Because I have been labeled as something other than black. Oh, you can't be black.
Oh, I've
How many
gotten that
times have
too.
you heard
Oh, yeah.
that? Oh, you must be.
You must have white in you. And it's
Yeah,
like,
yeah. You must be white, or you must be fill in the blank. I've been accused of being everything. And I'm like, no, but that's your impression of what a black person is, thanks to media and everything else. That's your impression, but I'm here to tell you this is who I am.
Right.
And throughout my career, I've had that. Much like your earlier comment,
Yeah.
wisdom is a great thing. I embrace it
Yeah.
now, and will tell you to back up because I know who I am. But again, to your original point, my 20-year-old self never would have the confidence to have done that.
Yeah.
I would tell the 20-somethings and the 30-somethings that are just starting out in this profession, you're valued and your voice needs to be heard. Say what you need to say, and be prepared to get knocked down, but be prepared to just get back up. I have been darlined. Haven't you been darlined?
darling,
Honey.
honeyed.
I've been honeyed.
Whistle that.
Oh yeah, especially on a
lately,
job
though.
site. Especially on a job
We
site.
don't do that anymore. By the
Yeah,
way.
I know.
not on your job sites, but I've been on some.
We're a little older than you,
Little
so we
older.
remember.
No, absolutely. That's impossible.
I remember walking down the street in New York in the 70s, 80s,
Yeah.
early 90s with the cat calls. And I also remember when it became illegal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. That's a great example of something that, where there was an intentional shift, right? In how it was accepted or not accepted.
I think it's so hard to kind of point to one thing
Oh,
because
yeah.
I think,
That was just Tuesday that you described.
that was
right?
just Tuesday,
Yeah.
right? I've shared before, and Gabrielle and I have talked about this. I've lost jobs because people talked to me on the phone and they thought I was white, and then I show up, and they're like, "Oh, you're Karen Compton,
Right. And your name is Karen.
and your name is Karen."
And your name is Karen.
Yeah, and my name is Karen, and your last name is Compton, and I've lost jobs because of my race, and I know
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And I still had to get up and go, okay, you know what? There's nothing I can do about that. I am who I am. I'm proud of who I am and where I come from and all of my struggles and challenges. We share them regularly, and I can't change that.
Yeah.
And that's not a me problem. That's a you problem.
Well, we talked about that earlier, right? Like, would you even want to work for that client?
Exactly.
No, and the one where it did happen, I had a great time in that interview, by the way, because I figured it out kind of early on.
Ah, yes.
And I just decided, you know what, this is really not a fit.
Yeah.
And there's something empowering about making that decision for yourself as opposed to somebody rejecting you and you kind of looking at yourself as being a victim within that situation. So it has gone throughout my career. I hope that for the 20-somethings coming through now,
Yeah.
that it'll be a little bit different.
Yeah, I think their surrounding demographic is a bit stronger, a bit more well-rounded and
Yeah.
diverse than yours was or mine was even.
But I think we both look forward to the day that we're not the only one in the boardroom.
Ooh,
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Because in some cases we still are, I think.
Yeah. Well, Noah, you
Yes.
put us in the hot seat, but now we're going to put you back in the hot seat.
That was fun.
Thank you for that question, and you get the final word.
Well, thank you.
So what do you have to share with our audience?
Well, so I was thinking about this. I heard a poet recently, actually on a Common album, and her name is Morgan Parker, and she said something that really resonated, which was that broken is beautiful and breaking is essential. And the first part of it I love because I think too often we get caught up in this, perfection model, right? But none of us are perfect, right? And in some ways, all the scars that you shared, the scars that I shared, right? That's what made us the strong people we are today and ultimately drove our success. But I like the breaking is essential part because in many ways I feel like that's what we're doing, or at least that's what we need to do, right? It can't just be this surface conversation and then we elect a black president and then racism is gone, right? We have to stay at that depth, right, where we're re-experiencing and appreciating the fact that we can never go back to certain practices of the past. And I think admitting to ourselves that we have so much work to do, right? When we look at, to your point, to both of your points, right? When we look in that boardroom and we don't see that representation, we have to be just absolutely intentional about creating representation in that space, because that's ultimately what's going to start to drive the cycle, right? When you can walk into that room and you can have that deep sigh because you see yourself, maybe even you see a few.
Oh, what
right?
love
what
that feeling!
yeah.
Don't you love that feeling?
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. And what's even great or even better about that is that the folks that are in that next generation, you talked about your 20-something-year-old self, they see that too. And when they see that, that puts a place for them in that room in their future. So, it's not just the one example.
Right.
It's, I have multiple examples of these people. I can go ask them different questions. I can get different perspectives on that. So I think that's really key. But recognizing that we're in the infancy of this and that we have a long way to go is really critical. It's really critical. So, the struggle continues, right?
Yes.
It will.
Baby steps, and we'll get there together.
It will. But we appreciate you joining us. We've run out of time.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so
pleasure.
much, Noah Boro.
Thank you.
I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I want to thank our founding partner, IBI Group, DLR Group for hosting us today, and all of our sponsors and supporters on this journey of difficult conversations.
And I want to thank our followers, our component partners, and our subscribers. And it's not too late to join the conversation. So follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And join us on YouTube.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Noah.
Thank you,
pleasure.
Noah.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it.